Hello and welcome to today's episode. My name is Joanna and I am a volunteer for POTS UK. On the POTS UK website, you might have noticed that a lot of people have shared their POTS stories and you might have read through a few of them. And we thought it would be a really great idea to try to share more POTS stories, but in different formats to suit even more people. So today I'm really excited and happy to have on the show Jasmeet. Jasmeet will be sharing with us a little bit about her story with POTS. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your journey. When were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed in the hottest summer of 2019. And I think it took me maybe 9 to 12 months to get an official diagnosis.
That must have been really tough. What was the journey like for you?
The journey was harrowing because, like so many other POTS patients, I had a number of tests and they were always coming back inconclusive. And that was really difficult because I knew that something wasn't right. I knew it. I could feel that my daily function was completely different. I could tell that how my body was reacting to things was completely different. And so having all these tests and having doctors tell you that, things are inconclusive or everything looks fine was really, really worrying because I started to think maybe I was making it all up or maybe they're missing something and it's going to be too late when they find it. You come up with all these kinds of stories in your head. And also it was really hard hiding it from the people around me. Um, I think with my family, it was like, oh, you're fine. Doctors have said you're fine. Just get on with it. And I just knew I wasn't fine, and I knew that it was getting worse and worse. And it took me a trip to A&E for a consultant to finally say, well, you need to go to a cardiologist now. And I think, like many other POTS patients, there's a lot of talk of it being mental health and being anxiety because the symptoms are so similar. And I knew in my head that I wasn't anxious. I knew I was quite collected, and I had a game plan. Like, this is what I'm feeling. I need to fix this. And that was really, really difficult as well. And I actually still struggle with that. I still struggle with going to medical appointments and having to advocate for myself and coming across neurologists or dietitians that I've never heard of POTS, and you're kind of in the appointment educating them. So it was a struggle, but I recognize my privilege because I know most POTS patients, it takes years. I think the average at the moment is 9 years. So I consider myself really, really lucky in that sense.
It's possibly getting a bit better now too with more recognition, which is amazing, which is also why we're doing these kind of stories and trying to raise awareness as much as possible. But
Definitely.
still, there's that part of it. There's the family. Sometimes people around you think, well, you look fine, everything's going on. The doctors as well are telling you kind of a similar story a lot of times where it looks fine, you're young, everything's fine, but you yourself have to find almost that trust within you where this is different, this feels different, this is not anxiety.
Absolutely. And my consultants and my team still haven't really been able to tell me when they think the POTS kind of woke up within me, but I had one acute medical incident where it drastically affected my heart rate. So the theory is maybe I've always been a little bit POTSy. I don't know, but we're leaning more towards it was that one medical acute event that kind of just pushed me over the edge, really. Yeah.
That's actually really interesting too. Although everybody's experience is so different, a lot of people do say kind of, I've always been a little bit more POTSy. There's something they could kind of look back and be like, perhaps that's why I always had to have my feet up.
Yeah. Yeah. The little things sometimes start to make sense. Yeah. And then you kind of see in people around you and you think to yourself, are you a little bit POTSy as well? But, we'll leave that conversation for another day, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. You start kind of looking around like,
Yeah.
So what would you say some of the biggest challenges have been with POTS?
I think you mentioned already, but the fact that it's an invisible syndrome, it's really, really difficult to get other people to understand that life is hard and I might look fine, but I'm really not fine if we're comparing it to, the previous version of me. I call myself like the 2.0 version of me now. Um, I think it's just it's a setup of society, isn't it? We go by face value. If someone looks fine, they're fine. We do it with mental health as well. And I really, really struggle with that, especially coming from the Punjabi Sikh community. I think it's a lot more prevalent. We take people for face value. We very rarely stop to investigate how they're feeling. And we only really pay attention to disability if it's outwardly visible. And it's a big shame because there are so many invisible disabilities and they're so life-changing. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that I face. Another one is constantly having to talk yourself up with everything. It's that constant conversation where you're talking to yourself. You're that stubborn little child that won't do something, and you're like, come on, we can do this, it's going to be okay, we can be brave. Constantly having to do that with everything, and constantly replaying that record in your brain whilst doing everything else on a daily basis. It's exhausting. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And I think another one is, like I've mentioned before, advocating for yourself all the time, whether it's with your peers, your friends, your family, medical professionals, saying, you know what, this is how I feel and it's real and it's happening to me. And it might not be another person's experience, but that doesn't take away from what I'm feeling. I find that very difficult. Just not knowing what day to day is going to be like. One day you're on your feet and you can go for a walk, and the next day you can't, or the next hour you can't, or you're going to have a faint and you can feel it or you can't feel it, and dealing with things and keeping it to yourself a lot. You don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable, or because you just don't have the energy to educate them on why it happens or why it's happening this way today. That's really hard, keeping a lot to yourself. And I think, again, with the community that I come from, we don't talk about those things openly. Women are meant to be, brave and strong, and we're meant to carry on with our roles, whether they're traditional or contemporary. We kind of glorify the female that is going through things and doesn't express it and still honors her duties and her roles on a day-to-day basis. It's not okay. It's not easy. We shouldn't have that added pressure and that added burden. And that's something really challenging as well, hearing like, oh, that person's really poorly and they've achieved this and this and this with their life. Well, everybody's different. And I think, comparisons are hard. Comparisons from other people, but also the comparisons I make myself. Every experience is different now compared to what it used to be. And sometimes you go back and you kind of reminisce, and people tell you not to do it. Your consultants tell you not to do it because it's not helpful, but sometimes you just can't help it. You miss that version of you. And always having to plan the littlest of things, planning when you're going to wash your hair, or when you're going to eat a really carby meal, or when you're going to go out and leave the house, and needing afterwards for a couple of days, and very challenging, and not being able to express that to the people around you because there isn't that space, there isn't that safe space, and also because you don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. And I think when we're talking about illness, we're talking about chronic illness, we're talking about disability, makes other people really uncomfortable. And I think us POTS patients, we people please a lot. I've noticed we use humor, we use wit, to get ourselves out of questions and situations. And I think we do that a lot because we're very in tune with our bodies, but we're also very in tune with how other people are reacting to us. And when we sense that, oh, this person it's a little bit uncomfortable with me expressing how I feel, we kind of divert. So those are some of the challenges, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that in such a vulnerable way too. That takes also a lot of courage, and it's such an important discussion and conversation to be having, because I'm sure so many others can relate to hearing parts of your story. And it's better to not feel so alone, because like you mentioned too, it's not just the physical symptoms, right? It's so much more of just it's almost like the invisible illness behind the invisible illness, because there's everything that's going on backstage with, again, trying to figure out how do I plan my day, which that does take up energy, but it's unfortunately something that needs to be done. Otherwise, there's more of those sudden crashes kind of out of nowhere. We're trying to prevent that, and then trying to navigate that whole thorny relationship with friends, family, and just people around you, trying to explain to them as best as possible, but then figuring out, like you said, this making them uncomfortable. There's a lot of feelings that also come up, people not wanting to really talk about illness. It's something that tends to make people uncomfortable. So all of these things come out right at the forefront, on top of the other physical symptoms.
Absolutely.
And with that, actually, what would you say POTS has had on your relationships?
A lot. Um, I think I've retreated into myself quite a lot. And I've done that because it's the easiest thing to do. I don't have the energy to constantly educate people out of their ignorance, because I have a very little amount of energy to start with on a daily basis. Sleep isn't sleep when you've got POTS. It doesn't replenish us. We've got that 24/7 fatigue, and it's very different to being tired. And I have to think really carefully about how I utilize my energy. But yeah, I make a really active and conscious effort to decide who I'm willing to communicate with and socialize with. And I don't think I was like that before. Um, I've had to be very careful about how I word things. And yeah, I think that I have gone into myself as a way to protect myself from hearing things like, oh, you're very weak. Oh, you're very fragile. It's in your head. Just be positive. People have it so much worse than you do. And we're all guilty of saying these things. And I think sometimes I might say these things, or, I might think these things, but I think that's affected my relationships. I don't really have the energy to be around people that say those things to me, because it damages how I'm feeling. And yeah, so that's definitely one way. I think I only tell people certain parts of how I'm feeling, again, for certain reasons. And it's difficult to become dependent on parents, especially when you're at the age where you feel like they should now be dependent on you, and you have a lot of guilt in your relationships, I think, when you're in a flare up and parents or aunties or uncles are doing things for you. There's a lot of guilt in that, and it's a guilt that you carry around 24/7. But I also think there's been positive changes. Like I said, I'm really selective about who I let into my life now, and I think that's great. And I'm also much more patient with people, because I understand how important that patience is for me when I receive it. And I think I give out patience a lot more to people now. I'm very careful about the language I use with people. I don't say things like get well soon anymore. You just say get well, doesn't matter when you get well, just try to get well. Yeah, so those are some of the changes off the top of my head. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because almost with something like POTS, you have to almost kind of step out of society, or you almost zoom out, which can also help you see things like maybe was I people pleasing too much before? And like you mentioned, then you have to become more selective. Now my energy bucket is a lot smaller. Who am I going to choose that I actually think deserves this energy bucket? So those changes as well. That's also an important part.
Definitely, yeah.
And tell us a little bit about how your job has been impacted by all of this.
So I work in education. I'm a secondary school teacher. My job, my career has been impacted a lot. I can no longer work full time. I can no longer teach kind of back to back how I would have. And I can no longer take on additional responsibilities. I think that's affected me a lot because when I got diagnosed with POTS, I just stepped into my dream role, kind of the role that I was aspiring to step into the whole time. And that was taken away very quickly. But yeah, the transition back to work has been very slow. I recognize my privilege and my blessing that I have a very, very understanding employer, head teacher, school that I work for, that were willing to wait for me, be patient, and make adjustments on my return. But you know, I think having POTS has made me an even better teacher. I do think that, I do feel that. Um, I think the emotional connection that I have with my pupils now is it's different. It's beautiful. You know, it was always amazing, but it's different. I've started to educate them a lot more about ableism and disability awareness, invisible disability awareness. It's shocking to know that this is not on our curriculum. Hopefully that will change, especially post-COVID now and more people getting diagnosed with POTS post-COVID. It was hard. It was a hard decision to make, to step down from roles and to decide if I was even going to come back to teaching. But you know, teaching makes me feel like I'm making a difference. When you've got to stop doing a lot of things that you loved, you also have to hold on to a few things that really make you feel like you're making an impact, right? And having a value in society. When you have any type of disability, whether it's invisible or not, you feel like you're a burden. And teaching makes me feel like I'm not a burden. Working with kids is amazing, really amazing. I think they tolerate conversations about sickness, illness, and disability much better than adults do. But like I said, I am very privileged to be in the position that I'm in, because I know a lot of people that have POTS aren't able to work or have been dismissed from roles unfairly because it's such an unknown condition. I've got an employer that went back and did the research, did the reading. The first aid team contacted POTS UK, put together a care plan for me, showed me the care plan, allowed me to edit it. My head teacher allowed me to propose adjustments and then edited adjustments so that they were better for me. The transition back was difficult. It's still difficult. I'm still at that stage where I'm not having that much of a social life because I'm back in work and I'm even more exhausted. But I'm just glad that I made it there. And I just want to say to people that are newly diagnosed, that have been in the position, that are in the position that I was, where you've had to step out of work, there are some amazing organizations out there that will help you transition back into work when you're ready, at the pace that you're ready. And you can find something that is suited to you and your needs, especially now with the virtual climate. And it's just about getting out there and asking for help. And you will get no's, but the yes will come as well. And I just want people to remember that, because working is a really important part of how we feel. Yeah. I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure if I kind of diverted away from it.
I would say you answered it very well. And thank you also for sharing a little bit of tips and resources that people can also look into and find something that can potentially help them, because there are starting to be more and more organizations and ways to to help people. And when you were talking about, even before you were talking, you feel you have more patience. And it's interesting how that kind of carried into you talking about your career and your job, how you probably even have more patience for the students. Mm-hmm. And just as you were talking about it too, your face really lit up. You could see how passionate you were about teaching, about helping young people, and how important it is that you in this role, although it has been extremely tough on you physically, are helping the next generation look at things like ableism and chronic illness and invisible illness in a new light, and thus shaping kind of the next generation of leaders, so that perhaps more opportunities will be similar to how your work experience was, right? Where somebody gets sick, it's not their fault that happened, but how do we help them find a way to make it so that they could still work? And these are extremely important discussions that need to be had.
It's not the condition that makes us disabled, right? Models of disability tell us that it's society that disables us, because society in the world is not set up for people who have a body that functions in a particular way, in an atypical way. Yeah, and the conversations need to happen a lot more, so people recognize that. And I didn't know that, you know, pre-POTS, I didn't know that. I just thought, you know, a person's condition makes them disabled, but it's not that. It's a setup of society. It's a setup of the world. If it was different, if it was set up differently, then everyone would be thriving. We wouldn't have clusters of marginalized people that are just surviving on a day-to-day basis rather than thriving. And hopefully that changes.
Exactly. And even little conversations like this and stories hopefully also make a difference. And
Yeah.
you get to also make a difference day to day with teaching people about this. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and share your story with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone out there for listening. And please remember that everyone's experiences are personal to them, and that POTS UK always recommends that people consult with their own healthcare professional and they do their own research before trying new things. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.